movie I wanted to make. If you're a guy like me, and you want to be prepared, but you're not paranoid or anything like that. You're a social person, and you talk to people and whatever, and you don't push people too hard on any one subject or anything like that. But you want to be as knowledgeable about everything as possible, so if somebody does ask you something, you can actually answer them. Well, you'll see a lot of things on how to survive a nuclear blast. Providing you're not right at the epicenter, and how far from the blast, and how much time you have from the fallout and stuff like that. And you'll find all kinds of stuff like that. Even back to the 1950s, you'll find this stuff. And but here's the problem I see is that most of the kind of how to survive stuff is from the 1950s. There's no updates. Like, you'd think FEMA would be all over that, saying, in this day and age, this is how you survive long term from a thermonuclear war. But you don't see that. You don't see that at all. And the problem with that is that because they know there is no chance of survival, or that you're just rolling the dice anyway, which I think a roll of dice is probably more realistic, depending on how many nukes go off and where they're strategically going off. If it was an all-out war, the first thing you probably want to do is head to the Arctic. Radiation is supposed to go dormant and cold. I don't know if that's true or not, but if that's the case, that's where I'm heading. But what do you do when you get to the Arctic? You freeze to death. So there's a lot of stuff on how to, avoid fallout and stuff like that. But how do you live long term after a nuke goes off? Even if you're in a shelter, okay, you got 20 years worth of food, okay, great. But what do you do when you come up? 20 years, you're not going to live long enough to outlive the radiation. That's going to be deadly for the next 20,000 years, if you're, depending on where you are. Okay, and let's say, okay, well, the radiation's fine. Okay, you might catch a cancer or something like that, but you're most likely fine. And you get up there. Well, what about nuclear winter? And surviving nuclear winter, it's kind of something that I looked at. If you've ever seen the movie The Road, where the sky's always dark and all the trees are dead and everything like that, I think that would probably depict a nuclear winter. But they don't say what happened in that movie, like in The Road. And it's a very dark, dreary movie. But I'm like, how would you survive? Okay, you got your canned food. What happens if you get raided and you lose all your canned food, or something happens and or you don't have the canned food? You're starving right away. So how do you survive? There's no more good sunlight to grow anything. It's like living in permanent overcast. The day's really short. Because of the overcast. This happened years ago. I guess about not the 1800s. But anyway, it might have been the 1800s. There was a huge volcano went off and just kind of blanketed the world in, volcanic ash in the sky type of thing, and it was just hazed out the sun, and it made it a really long, long winter, almost like a small ice age. And, that would have been hard on people. How the heck did they survive it? Well, first thing I would do is start cutting down trees. Yep, you heard me right. Start cutting down trees. And store that wood, about 25, it probably wouldn't be as much wood as you think, but 10 years worth of wood, probably about 280 cord, 300 cord of wood. I'd probably cut down about 500. Now you're probably saying, yeah, but it's all going to rot on you. No, you cover it. Yeah, but then it'll be too dry and it'll burn too fast. Well, that's the thing. If you leave it standing, it's going to rot because it's going to get damp and all that. So why waste it, right? So what's the point of that? Well, so you can make steam generators of some sort, which could then turn into your electricity. Yeah, it'd be a little bit old technology, but it could be done. So once you got electricity, hydroponics, start growing stuff, can it as fast as you can, and you get, it takes 4 months to grow a crop. So you'd have to build a greenhouse that would let in as much light as possible, and you would need a lot of people to do this. And that's the thing. It'd be one of those things you would have to set it up in such a way that it'd be protected 24/7, but you'd also have to set it up so that you could teach people how to do it, so that the more people that know how to do that, the better. And then you can give out food. And when you give out food, you make friends. When you make friends, people will protect it. When they protect it, they'll also learn how to do it. They'll do it themselves, and they won't need you anymore. And then what happens when the wood goes away? Well, you've got, 45 years worth of food, So as every decade the sun comes in a bit more, you start getting more of a growing season. That could help. That's about the only way I can see it. You know, you'd have to generate power somehow. You'd have to make fuel. What would be the best fuel? Next fuel, well, if you can't, biofuel, you'll have to make biofuel somehow. One of the best biofuel, get a pig. So you'll have to come up with something. Because you probably won't be able to go to a gas station in this kind of because they're just going to, it's not going to, there's going to be no refineries. It's all going to be blown up, right? I mean, trust me. In a World War III scenario, the first thing that they're going to strike is power grids and oil resources. It's always about destroying the resources first. So, you'll have to come up with something. I think the mighty potato will be a great thing. So you build a greenhouse that you can keep heated, and then hopefully the plants would come up. And then you would, if you could get some sort of windmill generator or something like that, any sort of green energy that could sustain it on a small scale, and then just duplicate it and, replicate it. So, okay, this guy knows how to make a generator, a windmill generator. He makes a windmill generator. He knows how to make a steam stove and a steam turbine. He makes that. And you have multiple sources. Why? Because in a nuclear winter, I'm sure the generators will be freezing up. To stay on top of that, I mean, you need to charge batteries. You need to charge that. You need to create power. And then you need lighting. So, these are the big things. You need to be able to create the artificial sun that you don't have to grow stuff. Guys who know how to grow weed, I guess, would be probably the people you'd have to talk to, and gardeners. How do you do it with, I don't do any of that stuff, but, gardening, hydroponically would be probably the only way to survive. Because it don't matter how many cans of whatever you have, you eventually run out. And let's say you don't run out, you have enough for your lifespan, and you find a survivor, and there's an Adam and Eve, and they have a kid. Well, what about them? Okay, well, when you run out and the food, well, what are they going to do to survive for their generation? You know what I'm saying? So, well, if you could defeat the radiation part, the gamma rays, that I don't think is as big of an issue as how you're going to feed yourself. I think that's the biggest issue. And that's the only thing I could think of is some sort of a windmill generator. But again, if it's like it goes into the planet goes into a small ice age because of the dark sky all the time, or such a short summer that you can't grow anything, because it takes about 4 months just to grow an average crop. Potatoes, all the potatoes and the tomatoes and everything, they stay small, and at the end, near the end, and then they in a week or two they go full size. But you need that warmth, you need that sun, you need that right humidity, you need that dew, and if you don't have that, you got to make it artificial. So, and sometimes just watering plants doesn't make them grow any better. It has to be natural stuff, So, surviving a nuclear winter, long term. I think in the short term, the best thing to do would be to put food away, like I've always been saying. Put food away, but start coming up with a plan. Like, what would you use? Personally, the first thing I would see is wood. Second would be, like I say, build some sort of like a greenhouse or something. And it'd have to be really tall, because what's going to happen is, as the snow gets, you might have 25 feet of snow eventually. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, it's going to, your house is going to be covered, so you have to have stuff that can move, but you need soil, you need this, you need that, and then in the spring it comes down. But, to be honest with you, nobody even knows if nuclear winter would make that much of a difference. Nobody knows, just nobody knows, because, well, it's kind of good in a way, because we don't know, because we haven't experienced it yet. That's the good part. But the bad part is, that's a bad time to figure out what to have to do and not be able to do it. The good news is that there is enough resources around that people could build things right away. Within a year of a disaster, they could come up from the ground or whatever, or shelter, or if they're far enough away, they could get out there and they can make stuff happen. But the problem is, excuse me, it's a pizza this morning. The problem is though, you're gonna have to fight for these resources. So this is one of those topics, like, how do you bring people in on it without freaking them out, and how do you prepare them for it without, sounding like a lunatic? Because it is a legit, I wouldn't say so much a fear, but a legit concern, because these weapons do exist, and they can create those conditions, for the most part. So I mean, we know what happens in volcanoes and all the ash, and we know that when a nuke does go off, it kicks up a pile of ash into the atmosphere. We just don't know how long it's going to stay there and how thick it's going to be. But we do know it will travel with the trade winds. So, its effects are going to be widespread. So, again, how do you survive nuclear winter long term? I don't know. That's a very tough one. Like I say, you can only put so much canned food away. Everything has an expiration date. And, think about how much money. I think it'd probably be cheaper to come up with a system that will replicate itself, growing food, than it is to try to store food. It probably would be cheaper. But you need to, considering the average person eats about 2,000 pounds of food a year, that's a real tough one. That's what I think the main is: fresh water and food, and then warmth. After that, everything else is pretty much going to be, you can deal with, But those, I think, are the three major staples. In that kind of condition, how would you do it? So this is, I guess, more of a question video than it is an answer video, but I think it's something that, people don't give that much of thought. Like, I love the, watching like the Survivor Man and the Bear Grylls and all that. There's another guy, he goes out and he's, Apocalypse Man. I like that guy, he's pretty cool. And this is how you survive. Great, you survive, but then what? How do you live? Okay, surviving is one thing, but how do you live? I mean, we could look at the Inuit. I mean, there's no trees up there. How do they stay warm? You know what I mean? Like, how did they do it? This is where I say we got to kind of look back at our history. How did they do it? And with the tools we have now, there's no reason why we couldn't live, twice as good as people back in the 1800s, even with the power out in a walk situation without grid. Yeah. This is a really tricky one. I really don't know what to give you on this one. So I guess I'll leave it with a question then. What would you do in a nuclear winter? How would you survive long term for the rest of your life? What practices would you adopt? Post it down below. Share it. Maybe some of us might come up with some good ideas and we can work together on it. And that's the whole point of these videos, is to work together on it. So that you have like-minded people, that you're not all alone in that kind of a situation. And if you were, and you had people that were like-minded, at least you could already form a security, because you can't stay awake 24/7. And if you had at least 3 people, you could take 8-hour shifts. If you have 30 people, you could take a couple of minutes a day, you take a shift, half an hour, and go do something. And we could work like an ant colony and rebuild society, starting with, who's locally around you. I guess I'll leave it there. Okay, movie I wanted to make. If you're a guy like me, and you want to be prepared, but you're not paranoid or anything like that, you're a social person, and you talk to people and whatever, and you don't push people too hard on any one subject or anything like that, but you want to be as knowledgeable about everything as possible, so if somebody does ask you something, you can actually answer them. Well, you'll see a lot of things on how to survive a nuclear blast, providing you're not right at the epicenter, and how far from the blast, and how much time you have from the fallout and stuff like that. And you'll find all kinds of stuff like that. Even back to the 1950s, you'll find this stuff. And but here's the problem I see, is that most of the kind of how to survive stuff is from the 1950s. There's no updates. Like, you'd think FEMA would be all over that, saying, in this day and age, this is how you survive long term from a thermonuclear war. But you don't see that. You don't see that at all. And the problem with that is that because they know there is no chance of survival, or that you're just rolling the dice anyway? Which I think a roll of dice is probably more realistic, depending on how many nukes go off and where they're strategically going off. If it was an all-out war, the first thing you probably want to do is head to the Arctic. Radiation is supposed to go dormant and cold. I don't know if that's true or not, but if that's the case, that's where I'm heading. But what do you do when you get to the Arctic? You freeze to death. So there's a lot of stuff on how to, avoid fallout and stuff like that. But how do you live long term after a nuke goes off? Even if you're in a shelter, okay, you got 20 years worth of food. Okay, great. Well, what you do when you come up? 20 years, you're not